The morning Lila Mae Carter's mother stopped breathing, the 10-year-old girl made a decision that would shatter a lonely cowboy's carefully constructed walls. With her 6-year-old sister clinging to her hand and their mother's body growing cold behind them, Lila walked 3 miles down a blistering Wyoming road toward a column of smoke on the horizon. She didn't know the man who lived at that ranch, didn't know his name or his story. But when Ethan Holt opened his door to find 2 starving, dust-covered girls whispering, "We have nowhere to go," he faced a choice that would cost him everything he'd built to protect himself from feeling again. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let me tell you about the day 2 lost girls found a man who'd forgotten how to be found. The sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern ridge when Lila Mae Carter realized her mother wasn't going to wake up. She'd known it was coming, had seen it in the way Mama's breathing had turned shallow 3 days ago, in the way her skin had taken on that gray pallor, in the way her eyes had stopped focusing on anything real. But knowing and accepting were 2 different creatures entirely, and as Lila stood beside the narrow bed in their one-room cabin, she felt the weight of the world settle onto shoulders that had already been carrying far too much. "Mama?" Daisy's voice was small behind her, still thick with sleep. "Is Mama sleeping?" Lila turned to find her sister sitting up on their shared pallet, the torn rag doll clutched against her chest. At 6 years old, Daisy still believed in things like tomorrow and safety, and mothers who didn't leave. The morning light filtering through the cabin's single window caught the gold in her hair, the same shade as their mother's had been before the sickness had dulled it. Lila's throat closed around the truth. She was 10 years old, and the only adult left in the world who'd cared whether she lived or died was lying still and silent under a threadbare quilt. "She's at rest now, Daisy." "But she'll wake up for breakfast, won't she?" Daisy slid off the pallet, her bare feet silent on the dirt floor. "I can help make the porridge. I'm big enough now." Lila caught her sister before she could reach the bed, pulling her close even as Daisy squirmed in protest. The cabin smelled of sickness and cedar smoke and the particular emptiness that comes when a presence that has filled a space is suddenly, irrevocably gone. "Daisy, listen to me." Lila knelt so they were eye to eye. Her sister's face was still round with childhood, still innocent of the kind of knowledge Lila had been forced to acquire too young. "Mama's not going to wake up. She's gone to be with Papa now." The words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Their father had died in a mining accident 18 months ago, buried under half a mountain when a shaft collapsed. They'd never even recovered his body. And now Mama, worn down by grief and consumption, and the grinding poverty of trying to keep 2 daughters fed on a washerwoman's wages, had followed him into whatever came after. "No." Daisy shook her head, her lower lip trembling. "No, Mama promised. She promised she wouldn't leave." "I know, sweetheart. I know she did." Lila's own eyes burned, but she couldn't afford to cry. Not yet. Not when Daisy needed her to be strong, needed her to have answers, needed her to somehow make sense of a world that had just revealed itself to be fundamentally senseless. She pulled the quilt up over their mother's face with hands that shook only slightly. 18 months of watching Mama fade had taught her certain practicalities. The body would need to be buried, but the ground was hard-packed, and Lila had no shovel. The cabin belonged to the mining company, and they'd want it back as soon as they learned its occupant had died. And there was the matter of the completely empty cupboard, the lack of any money, and the fact that their nearest neighbors were 2 miles away and had made it clear they had no charity to spare for a widow's children. "We need to go," Lila said, her mind clicking through possibilities with a clarity born of desperation. "Get your shoes on. And your bonnet." "Where are we going?" Daisy's voice was very small now, the reality beginning to seep in despite her protests. "To find help." Lila moved to the corner where their few possessions were stored in a wooden crate. She pulled out a flour sack and began filling it with the essentials. Their mother's worn journal of remedies and recipes, a tintype of their parents on their wedding day, Daisy's doll, a shawl that still smelled faintly of the lavender soap Mama had made. Her own hand stilled on a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Her mother's wedding ring and the silver locket that had belonged to their grandmother. She added them to the sack. "But who's going to help us?" Daisy had found her shoes, battered leather things that were too small but would have to do. Mr. Henderson said we were a burden, and Mrs. Patterson said Mama should have thought about us before she got sick. The casual cruelty of neighbors who turned away a dying woman and her children made something hot and hard form in Lila's chest. She straightened, slinging the sack over her shoulder. "We don't need them," she said, with more confidence than she felt. "I saw smoke yesterday, from the ridge. Someone's got a fire going to the west, which means they've got a house. Maybe they've got a heart, too." It was thin hope, but it was all she had. The morning was already heating up when they stepped out of the cabin for the last time. Lila looked back once at the structure that had been their home, at the single window with its oilcloth covering, at the door that was already hanging slightly crooked on its hinges. Somewhere inside, her mother lay in the bed where she'd brought both her daughters into the world, where she'd told them stories on cold nights, where she'd coughed her lungs bloody while trying not to wake them. "Goodbye, Mama," Daisy whispered, and Lila felt her own throat close. "Goodbye," she echoed, and then she took her sister's hand and turned toward the west. The road, such as it was little more than a track worn into the hard Wyoming earth by wagon wheels and livestock. It wound between sage-covered hills under a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and with each step, the sun climbed higher and the heat pressed down harder. Lila had thought to bring the water skin, at least, though it was less than half full. She rationed it carefully, allowing Daisy small sips whenever her sister's steps began to drag. They'd been walking for perhaps an hour when Daisy stumbled. "I'm tired," she said, and there were tears tracking through the dust on her cheeks. "My feet hurt. Can we rest?" Lila wanted to say yes, wanted to find shade and let Daisy sleep, and pretend that when they woke up, everything would be different. But the smoke she'd seen had been miles away, and they had no food, no shelter, and no reason to believe anyone would come looking for them. Their mother's death wouldn't be discovered for days, maybe weeks. And by then, "Just a little further," Lila said, though she had no idea if it was true. "See that rise ahead? Once we get over that, we'll be able to see how much closer we are." It was a lie, but it got Daisy moving again. The sun was directly overhead when they finally crested a long slope and saw it. A ranch house in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney in a steady column. It was larger than Lila had expected, a two-story structure built of timber and stone, with a barn and several outbuildings scattered around it. Fences marked off pastures where cattle grazed, and she could see the glint of water from what must be a creek or spring. "Look," she breathed, and felt something like hope flicker in her chest. "Someone lives there. Someone with enough to spare for a fire in summer. Do you think they'll be nice?" Daisy's hand tightened in hers. Lila didn't answer. She didn't know. But they were out of options and almost out of water, and the road behind them led only back to a dead woman and an empty cabin. "Come on," she said, and started down the slope. The ranch looked better maintained the closer they got. The fences were mended, the barn door hung straight, and the house itself had glass windows, real glass, not oilcloth or hide. Whoever lived here had money, or at least more than the mining families Lila had grown up around. That might mean generosity. It might mean closed doors and suspicion. She'd find out soon enough. They were perhaps 50 yards from the house when a man emerged from the barn. He was tall, lean in the way of men who worked hard and ate sparse, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if it hadn't been set in such hard lines. He wore work clothes, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, boots worn at the heels, and he moved with the careful economy of someone who'd learned to conserve energy. He saw them immediately, stopped, stared. Lila felt her courage waver. They must look like something out of a nightmare. Two dusty, ragged girls appearing out of nowhere in the middle of nowhere, with hollowed eyes and bare legs, and desperation written in every line of their bodies. "Please," she called out, her voice cracking. "Please, we need help." The man didn't move for a long moment. Then, slowly, he started toward them. As he got closer, Lila could see his face more clearly. He was maybe 30, maybe older, hard to tell with men who worked outside. His eyes were a peculiar shade of gray-green, like sage after rain, and they held something that made her chest tighten. Not anger, not suspicion, recognition. As if he'd seen ghosts before and knew exactly what they looked like. What happened? His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Where are your folks? They're gone. The words came out flat, and Lila hated how final they sounded. Mama died this morning. Papa died last year. We walked here because we saw your smoke, and we have nowhere else to go. Beside her, Daisy made a small sound and pressed closer. The man's face didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. He looked at them, really looked, taking in Daisy's 2 small shoes and Lila's flour sack bundle, and the way they both swayed slightly on their feet from exhaustion and hunger and grief too big for their small bodies. You walked from where? He asked. The mining camp, east of here. Lila's vision was starting to blur at the edges. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe. And Daisy had only had half of that. 3 miles, I think, maybe 4. In this heat, without adequate water. It wasn't a question. The man's jaw tightened. Then he seemed to come to some decision. Come inside, both of you. He turned and started toward the house without waiting to see if they'd follow. Lila and Daisy exchanged a glance, then hurried after him. The interior of the house was blessedly cool after the blazing sun. Lila had a confused impression of solid furniture, clean floors, windows that let in light but kept out heat. The man led them to a kitchen that was larger than the entire cabin she'd grown up in, with a pump sink and an actual stove and a table that could seat 6. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chairs. I'll get water. Lila sank into a chair that felt like luxury after days of sitting on dirt floors and walking on hard roads. Daisy climbed into the one beside her, her eyes wide as she took in their surroundings. The man worked the pump, filling 2 tin cups with water that ran clear and cold. He set them on the table, then turned to the stove where a pot of something was simmering. When did you last eat? He asked, his back to them. Yesterday, Lila admitted. Morning. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't comment. He ladled what looked like stew into 2 bowls, added spoons, and set them in front of the girls along with thick slices of bread that must have been fresh that morning. Eat slow, he said. Your stomachs aren't going to like it if you rush. Lila wanted to devour it, wanted to shove food into her mouth until the gnawing emptiness in her belly was filled, but she forced herself to follow his instruction. Beside her, Daisy did the same, though tears were streaming down her face as she ate, the kind of crying that came from relief and exhaustion, and too many feelings to name. The man leaned against the counter and watched them with those sage-green eyes that seemed to see more than Lila wanted them to. What's your name? He asked after a moment. Lila Mae Carter. This is my sister Daisy. She swallowed a mouthful of stew, venison, potatoes, carrots, seasoned with salt and something herbal. It was the best thing she'd ever tasted. What's yours? Ethan Holt. He paused. This is my ranch. I run cattle, mostly, some horses. Do you live here alone? The question was out before Lila could stop it, and she immediately regretted it. Too personal, too intrusive. But Ethan didn't seem offended. Yes. One word, but it carried weight. Lila looked around the kitchen again, noting details she'd missed before. The shelf with 2 cups. No, 3, but one was smaller, child-sized. The embroidered cloth covering the breadbasket. The jar of wildflowers on the windowsill, wilted now but placed there by someone who'd cared about such things. You didn't always, she said quietly. Ethan's face closed like a door slamming shut. No. Eat your food. Lila bit her lip but obeyed. Whatever story lay behind that child-sized cup and those dead flowers, Ethan Holt wasn't ready to share it. And she had no right to ask, not when he'd just fed them and given them water and let them into his home, when he had every reason to turn them away. They ate in silence after that. The only sounds, the clink of spoons against bowls and the distant lowing of cattle outside. When Daisy had finished half her portion and started to nod over the rest, Ethan straightened. There's a room upstairs, he said. Second door on the right. Bed's made up. Your sister can sleep there. Both of us? Lila asked. Both of you. He moved to the sink, began pumping water to wash the pot. We'll figure out the rest after you've had some rest. Lila wanted to ask what the rest meant, wanted to know if he was going to send them away or turn them over to the authorities or demand something in return for his charity. But exhaustion was pulling at her now, making her limbs heavy and her thoughts slow. Thank you, she managed. We'll work to pay you back. I can cook and clean, and Daisy's good with chickens, and—" "Rest first," Ethan interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "Everything else can wait." Lila nodded and stood, pulling Daisy up with her. Her sister was already half asleep, leaning heavily against her side. They made their way to the stairs, Lila's hand on the railing to steady them both. The second door on the right opened into a bedroom that made Lila's throat tight. It was a child's room, a girl's room, painted a soft yellow with white curtains at the window. The bed was narrow but looked impossibly soft, covered with a quilt stitched in a pattern of stars. There was a dresser, a washstand with a flowered basin, a rag rug on the floor. And on the dresser, a porcelain doll with painted features and a dress made of lace. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. Someone had loved the child who'd lived here, had made this room beautiful for her, had probably tucked her in at night and kissed her forehead and promised that everything would be all right. Where was that child now? She pushed the thought away and guided Daisy to the bed. Her sister was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow, one hand still clutching her rag doll. Lila pulled the quilt up over her, smoothed the tangled blonde hair back from her face. "We're safe," she whispered, though she didn't know if it was true. "We're safe, and we're together, and that's what matters." Daisy didn't stir. Lila stood there for a long moment, looking down at her sister's sleeping face. Then she turned and walked back downstairs. Ethan was still in the kitchen, sitting at the table now with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up when she entered, but didn't speak. "The room," Lila said. "It was for your daughter." Not a question. Ethan's hands tightened around the cup. "Yes." "Where is she?" For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then in a voice scraped raw, "Buried, along with her mother. Fever took them both 2 years ago." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with a grief that Lila understood in her bones. She thought of her own mother lying cold in a cabin miles away. Thought of her father, crushed under rock and earth. Thought of all the ways love could be stolen, all the ways a heart could break and keep on beating. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Ethan nodded once, a sharp jerk of his head. Then he stood, set his cup in the sink. "Your mother," he said. "Someone needs to see to her." "I know." Lila's voice was small. I couldn't. I'll go." Ethan was already moving toward the door, reaching for a hat on a peg. "Mining camp east, you said?" "Yes, the last cabin on the north side. There's a broken wagon wheel out front." He paused, looking back at her. "You should rest too. You look about ready to fall over." "I will," Lila promised. After you come back. I need to know." Understanding flickered across his face. He nodded. "Lock the door behind me," he said. "Don't open it for anyone but me." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Lila did as he'd instructed, sliding the bolt home. Then she went to the window and watched as Ethan saddled a horse, mounted, and rode east at a steady canter that would eat up the miles quickly. He was going to bury her mother. A stranger was going to do what Lila herself had been unable to manage. The tears came then hot and fast, and she let them. Let herself cry for her mother and her father and the childhood that had ended the moment she'd pulled that quilt over a still face. Let herself cry for Daisy, who'd lost everyone, and for Ethan Holt, who'd lost his whole family and somehow still had room in his broken heart to help 2 orphaned girls. When the tears finally stopped, Lila felt hollow but steadier. She washed her face at the kitchen pump, drank another cup of water, then climbed the stairs to the yellow bedroom where Daisy still slept. She lay down beside her sister on top of the quilt, careful not to wake her. Through the window, she could see the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. This wasn't their home. This couldn't last. But for right now, for this moment, they were safe and fed and sleeping in a real bed. It would have to be enough. Lila woke to the sound of hoofbeats and sat up so quickly her head spun. Beside her, Daisy stirred but didn't wake, her small face peaceful in sleep. The light coming through the window had turned deep gold, late afternoon then. She'd slept longer than she'd intended. She moved to the window and looked out to see Ethan dismounting near the barn. his movements slow and deliberate. Even from this distance, she could see the weariness in the set of his shoulders, the dust that covered him from hat to boots. He'd ridden hard and fast, there and back. He'd buried her mother. Lila pressed her palm against the cool glass and allowed herself one shaky breath before straightening her spine. Ethan Holt had done what needed doing, had shown them more kindness in half a day than their neighbors had shown in 18 months. The least she could do was not burden him with more tears. She made her way downstairs, moving quietly so as not to wake Daisy. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows and catching on the jars lined up along the shelves. Everything was orderly, clean, maintained with the kind of care that spoke of habit rather than hope. The door opened and Ethan stepped inside, pulling off his hat. Their eyes met across the room. "It's done," he said simply. "I marked the grave, said a few words. Thank you." The words felt inadequate, but Lila didn't know what else to say. I wanted to be there, but you took care of your sister. That's what your mother would have wanted." Ethan hung his hat on its peg, then moved to the pump to wash the trail dust from his hands and face. "There's something else. I stopped by the mining office. They're clearing out your cabin tomorrow. Anything you need from there, it's gone after that." Lila's heart sank. She'd known it was coming, but the finality of it still stung. "There's nothing much, just Mama's things, her remedies and recipes, but I already have those." "The journal you were carrying." "Yes." She'd tucked it safely in the flour sack, along with the few other items that mattered. Everything else, the broken furniture, the thin blankets, the chipped dishes, could be discarded without regret. Ethan dried his hands on a towel, his movements precise. "The foreman asked about you girls. I told him you'd be staying here for now." The floor seemed to shift under Lila's feet. "Here? But we can't. We're not your responsibility." "You are now." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "You showed up at my door half dead from heat and hunger. That makes you my responsibility until I can figure out what comes next." "What does come next?" The question came out smaller than Lila intended. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. "I don't know yet. The mining company won't take you. County Orphanage is 3 days' ride from here, and I've heard stories about that place that would curl your hair. There might be families willing to take one child, but not two together." "No." The word came out sharp and fierce. "We stay together. Daisy and me, we're all each other has left. I'll work, I'll do whatever needs doing, but we don't get separated." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Approval, maybe, or recognition. "That's what I figured you'd say. So we'll work it out. For now, you're here, you're fed, and you're safe. That's enough to start with." Lila felt her throat tighten. "Why are you doing this? You don't know us. We could be your children who lost their mother." The words came out rough, abraded. "That's all I need to know." The unspoken grief in his voice made Lila understand. He was helping them because he hadn't been able to help his own daughter. Because he'd arrived too late to save his wife and child from fever, and now 2 more girls had appeared on his doorstep with nowhere else to go. He was trying to rewrite an ending he couldn't change. "I can cook," Lila said after a moment. "Not fancy, but decent. And I can clean and mend and tend a garden. Mama taught me her remedies too, how to make poultices and tinctures and teas for different ailments." "That's useful knowledge." Ethan moved to the stove, checked the fire. "How old are you, Lila?" 10. Daisy's sick." He nodded slowly. "Old enough to understand what I'm about to tell you, then. This arrangement, it's temporary. People in town are going to talk. A single man with 2 young girls living under his roof, it's going to raise questions. Ugly ones." Lila felt her stomach clench. She'd heard the whispers before, the way some folks turned kindness into something twisted. "We could say we're your nieces, your brother's children." "I don't have a brother." And lies have a way of unraveling. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. "I'm not saying we broadcast the situation, but we can't hide it either. Not in a town this size." "So what do? "We keep our heads down and give them no reason to question my character or your safety. You help around the house, You mind your manners, and if anyone asks, you tell them the truth. Your mother died. You came here seeking help, and I took you in until a better solution presents itself. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was more than Lila had expected. She nodded. There's one more thing. Ethan's gaze was steady on hers. That room you're sleeping in, it was my daughter Emma's. If it bothers you, being in there, I can... It doesn't bother me, Lila said quickly. It's beautiful. She must have been very loved. Ethan's face did that closing thing again, but this time Lila saw past it to the raw wound beneath. She was. Both of them were. I'll take good care of it. The room, I mean. Keep it clean and not let Daisy mess anything up. Daisy can mess it up all she wants. It's just a room. But the way he said it suggested it was anything but. I'll bring in some water so you can both wash up properly. There are clothes in the dresser, Emma's things. They'll be big on Daisy, but you can alter them if you know how. I do. Mama had taught her to sew, had made her practice until her stitches were small and even. Good. Supper will be in an hour or so. Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread. I can make it, Lila offered, if you show me where things are. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, this girl child trying so hard to be useful, to earn her place, to somehow repay the debt of simple human kindness. You don't have to prove your worth here, Lila. You're allowed to just be a kid for a while. The words hit harder than they should have. Lila felt her eyes burn but blinked it back. I don't know how to do that anymore. I know. Ethan stood, his chair scraping against the floor. But maybe we can both learn. The next 3 days fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, if normal could exist in a world where everything familiar had been stripped away. Lila woke early, helped with breakfast, and spent her mornings learning the layout of the ranch and the routines that kept it running. Ethan was patient in his teaching, showing her how to gather eggs from the henhouse, how to milk the cow without spooking her, how to pump water and carry it without spilling. Daisy was slower to emerge from her grief. She was quiet in a way she'd never been before, clinging to Lila's skirts and watching Ethan with wide, uncertain eyes. But gradually, the newness of the place began to work on her. She discovered the barn cats and their new litter of kittens. She found wildflowers growing near the creek and brought them inside in careful handfuls. And one morning, Lila came downstairs to find her sister sitting at the kitchen table with Ethan, helping him snap green beans for dinner. She wanted to help, Ethan said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. Insisted, actually. Daisy looked up with the first real smile Lila had seen since their mother died. Ethan says if I do a good job, I can name one of the kittens. Is that so? Lila felt something ease in her chest at the sight. Fair's fair, Ethan said gruffly. Girl does the work. She gets the reward. It was a small thing, but it mattered. It meant he saw Daisy not as a burden or a temporary inconvenience, but as a person capable of contributing, worthy of consideration. That afternoon, while Daisy napped and Ethan was out checking fence lines, Lila pulled out her mother's journal. She'd been avoiding it, knowing that opening those pages would make the loss feel more real. But sitting in the quiet kitchen with sunlight streaming through the windows, she found the courage to crack the worn leather cover. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, neat at first, growing shakier toward the end as the sickness had taken hold. Recipes for bread and stew and pie, notes about which herbs grew best in which season, remedies for fever, cough, infection, pain, and scattered throughout little observations about life, about her daughters, about the husband she'd loved and lost. Lila has her father's stubborn streak. Once she sets her mind to something, there's no talking her out of it. It will serve her well, I think. In this world, a woman needs stubbornness. Daisy laughed today at a butterfly. Such a pure sound. I want to hold on to it forever. The cough is worse. I try not to let the girls see how bad it's gotten. They've already lost so much. Lila pressed her hand flat against the page, feeling the slight indentation of the pen strokes. Her mother had known she was dying, had written these words knowing her daughters would read them someday. She wanted you to have that. Lila startled, looking up to find Ethan in the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. No need to apologize. He moved into the room, his boots soft on the floorboards. That knowledge, those remedies, they're worth more than gold in a place like this. Your mother was passing down something important. She was a washerwoman, Lila said. That's what people called her. But before Papa died, before we lost everything, she was the one folks came to when they were sick. She had a gift for healing, and she gave it to you. Lila hadn't thought of it that way, but he was right. Every page of this journal was a gift, a piece of her mother that would live on through her hands. I want to use it, she said. I want to help people the way she did. Ethan nodded slowly. Then you will. But first you need to learn it properly. Study those remedies, practice them. Make sure you understand not just what to do, but why. Healing's not something to take lightly. Mama always said that too. Lila closed the journal carefully. She said every remedy could help or harm depending on how it was used. She was a wise woman. Ethan paused, then added, There's a woman in town, Clara Whitmore, runs the general store. She knows herbs and remedies too. Might be willing to teach you some things your mother's journal doesn't cover. You think she'd do that? For me? Won't know unless we ask. He moved to the stove, checking the fire. I need to go into town tomorrow for supplies. You and Daisy can come along, meet some folks. Might make things easier if people see you're real children, not some scandalous secret I'm hiding out here. The prospect of going into town made Lila's stomach flutter nervously. What if they ask questions about us, I mean? Then we answer them honestly. Your mother died, you came here, I took you in. It's not complicated. But it was complicated, Lila thought. Everything about their situation was complicated. Still, Ethan was right. Hiding would only make things worse. All right, she said. We'll go. The next morning dawned clear and hot, the kind of day where the sun felt like a physical weight pressing down from a cloudless sky. Lila dressed Daisy in one of Emma's old dresses, carefully altered to fit her smaller frame, and tried to tame her sister's wild blonde curls into something resembling braids. She herself wore a dress that had been her mother's, let out at the seams and hemmed to proper length. Ethan hitched the wagon and loaded empty crates for the supplies they'd be bringing back. He'd shaved that morning and put on a clean shirt, and Lila realized with a start that he was making an effort, presenting them all as respectable, prepared for scrutiny. The ride into town took the better part of an hour, the wagon wheels creaking over ruts in the road while dust rose in pale clouds behind them. Daisy sat between Lila and Ethan on the bench seat, her earlier nervousness giving way to curiosity as they got closer and buildings began to appear. The town of Ashford was bigger than Lila had expected, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, side streets branching off into residential areas, and enough traffic to suggest a population that could sustain multiple businesses. She saw a church with a white steeple, a hotel, a saloon, a bank, and various shops and offices. Ethan guided the wagon to a stop in front of a building with a sign that read, Whitmore's General Store. Through the large front windows, Lila could see shelves stocked with goods and a counter near the back. Stay close, Ethan said as they climbed down. And let me do most of the talking at first. He pushed open the door, a bell jingling overhead to announce their arrival. The store was dim after the bright sunlight outside, and it took Lila's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw a woman behind the counter looking up from a ledger. Clara Whitmore was perhaps 35, with dark hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck and a face that was more handsome than pretty. She wore a simple dress of gray cotton and a white apron, and her eyes were the kind of sharp brown that missed nothing. Ethan, she said, and there was surprise in her voice. I didn't expect to see you in town this week. Needed supplies. He gestured toward Lila and Daisy. And wanted to introduce you to Lila and Daisy Carter. They're staying with me for the time being. Clara's gaze shifted to the girls, and Lila saw her take in every detail. The carefully mended dresses, the clean faces, the way Daisy pressed close to her sister's side. Staying with you, Clara repeated, her tone carefully neutral. Their mother passed recently. They had nowhere else to go. Ethan's voice was steady, matter of fact. I'm providing temporary shelter until a more permanent solution can be arranged. The silence that followed was heavy with unasked questions. Then Clara came around the counter, moving with deliberate purpose, and crouched down to Daisy's eye level. Hello there, she said gently. That's a very pretty doll you have. Daisy clutched her rag doll tighter, but managed a small smile. Her name is Molly. Molly is a fine name. Clara's eyes were kind now. the sharpness replaced by something softer. My name is Clara. I run this store, which means I have all sorts of interesting things. Would you like to see? Daisy looked up at Lila, who nodded. You can go. Just stay where I can see you. Clara led Daisy toward a corner where bolts of fabric were displayed in bright colors. Lila watched them go, then became aware that both Ethan and Clara, who'd glanced back, were watching her watch Daisy. She's protective, Clara observed, straightening. She's had to be. Ethan's voice carried an edge of warning, as if daring Clara to make something ugly out of the situation, but Clara just nodded. How old? 10. Daisy's 6. And their mother? Consumption. Died 4 days ago. The girls walked to my place from the mining camp. Ethan pulled a list from his pocket. I need flour, sugar, salt, coffee, beans, dried beef if you have it, thread and needles, lamp oil. Clara took the list, scanning it quickly. I can fill all of this. It'll take a few minutes. That's fine. As Clara moved to gather the supplies, Lila drifted toward where Daisy was examining a bolt of blue calico with wonder on her face. She could hear Ethan and Clara talking in low voices behind her, but couldn't make out the words. She told herself it didn't matter, people would talk regardless. Lila? She turned to find Clara watching her with an expression that was difficult to read. Ethan mentioned you know remedies, that your mother taught you. Yes, ma'am. She kept a journal with recipes and treatments. I've been studying it. Would you be interested in learning more? I grow herbs in my garden behind the store, and I've picked up quite a bit of knowledge over the years. Not claiming to be a doctor, but I know what works for common ailments. Hope flickered in Lila's chest. I'd like that very much, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. Clara's expression warmed. In fact, I could use someone with nimble fingers to help me prepare remedies for sale. The arthritis in my hands makes the detailed work difficult sometimes. If you were willing to learn and help, I could pay you a small wage. Lila's eyes widened. You'd pay me? For learning? I'd pay you for the work. The learning would be a bonus for both of us. Clara glanced at Ethan, who was watching this exchange with something like relief on his face. Say, Saturday mornings to start? You could bring Daisy. I have picture books she could look at while we work. Yes, thank you. Lila felt dizzy with the sudden shift in fortune. A way to earn money, a way to learn, a way to honor her mother's legacy. Clara smiled, and it transformed her whole face. Good. Then I'll see you Saturday. The rest of the shopping passed quickly. Clara filled Ethan's order with efficient movements, adding a bag of peppermint sticks to the pile and winking at Daisy when the girl's eyes went wide. Other customers came and went, their gazes lingering on Lila and Daisy with open curiosity, but no one asked questions directly. It wasn't until they were loading the wagon that a man approached, older with silver hair and a badge pinned to his vest. Ethan, he said, word's already spreading that you've got company out at your place. Sheriff Morgan, Ethan's voice was cool. These are the Carter girls, Lila and Daisy. Their mother died of consumption 4 days ago. They came to my ranch seeking help. The sheriff's eyes were shrewd as he looked the girls over. And you took them in, just like that. Just like that? People are going to talk, Ethan. You know that. A man alone with 2 young girls? Let them talk. Ethan's jaw was set in a hard line. I've done nothing wrong. The girls needed help, and I provided it. If that's a crime in this town, then Ashford's got bigger problems than gossip. Sheriff Morgan held up his hands. I'm not accusing you of anything, just making sure you understand what you're taking on. Questions will be asked. The county might get involved. Then let them ask. Let the county come. They'll find 2 well-fed, well-cared-for children living in a safe home. Ethan's voice was steady, but Lila could hear the steel beneath. Unless you're suggesting I should have turned them away, left them to starve in an empty cabin. The sheriff's expression softened slightly. No, I'm not suggesting that. Just be smart about this, Ethan. Make sure everything's above board. It is. All right, then. The sheriff tipped his hat to Lila and Daisy. Welcome to Ashford, girls. If you need anything, my office is just down the street. As he walked away, Lila felt her hands shaking. She climbed into the wagon beside Daisy, who was clutching her peppermint stick like a treasure. Ethan didn't speak until they were out of town, the buildings falling away behind them. Then, quietly, that's how it's going to be. Questions, suspicion, people making something dirty out of simple kindness. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. "We're causing you trouble." "No," his voice was firm. "You're not causing anything. Other people's small minds, that's what causes trouble. You just focus on being kids and let me worry about the rest." But Lila couldn't stop worrying. She'd seen the way Sheriff Morgan had looked at them, the calculation in his eyes. She'd heard the unspoken threat. The county might get involved. If the county got involved, she and Daisy could be separated, sent to different families, or worse, to that orphanage Ethan had mentioned. That night, after Daisy was asleep, Lila sat at the kitchen table with her mother's journal open in front of her. But instead of reading, she found herself thinking about Clara Whitmore, about the kindness in her eyes when she'd spoken to Daisy, about the job offer that had come without hesitation or conditions, about the way she'd looked at Ethan, steady and knowing, like she understood exactly what he was trying to do. "Can't sleep?" Lila looked up to find Ethan in the doorway, still dressed despite the late hour. "Just thinking." "About the sheriff?" "About everything." Lila closed the journal. "About what happens if the county decides we can't stay here. About where Daisy and I would end up." Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. In the lamplight, his face looked older, worn by too many losses. "I've been thinking about that too," he admitted. "And I don't have good answers yet. But I'll tell you this. I'm not going to let them separate you. Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, you and Daisy stay together." "Why?" The question burst out before Lila could stop it. "Why do you care so much? We're nothing to you." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "My daughter Emma was 5 when the fever took her. My wife Sarah tried to nurse her through it and got sick herself. I was out on a cattle drive, 3 days away. By the time I got the message and made it home..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I was too late." They'd both been dead for a day. Lila felt tears prick her eyes. "I couldn't save them," Ethan continued. "I arrived too late to even say goodbye. That's something I have to live with every day. But you girls, you showed up at my door alive, needing help, and this time I wasn't too late. This time I could actually do something." He met her gaze. "So that's why I care. Because I failed my own family, and I'll be damned if I fail yours too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and determination, and something that felt almost like hope. "Thank you," Lila whispered, "for not being too late." Ethan nodded once, sharp and quick, then stood. "Get some sleep. Morning comes early on a ranch." But as Lila climbed the stairs to the yellow bedroom where Daisy slept peacefully, she felt something shift inside her. They weren't safe yet. The questions and suspicions would continue, and the county might still come. But they weren't alone anymore. And somehow, that made all the difference. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the mountains look close enough to touch. Lila woke before dawn, as had become her habit, and lay in the pale light listening to Daisy's soft breathing beside her. Today was her first day working with Clara Whitmore, and her stomach fluttered with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. She dressed carefully in the blue calico dress Clara had gifted her at their second visit to town. "Can't have my apprentice looking shabby," the woman had said with a wink that made the charity feel less like pity, and braided her hair so tightly her scalp ached. Daisy was harder to rouse, complaining sleepily about the early hour until Lila reminded her about the picture books Clara had promised. Downstairs, Ethan already had breakfast on the table. Eggs, bacon, thick slices of bread toasted over the fire. He'd been teaching Lila to cook, his patience apparently endless as she learned to judge heat by holding her hand above the stove, to crack eggs without getting shell in the pan, to knead biscuit dough just enough but not too much. "Ready for your first day of work?" he asked, pouring coffee into his cup. "I think so." Lila buttered bread for Daisy, cut it into small squares. "What if I'm not good at it? What if I can't remember all the herbs or I mix something wrong?" "Then you'll learn from your mistakes. That's how everyone learns." Ethan sat across from them, his own plate untouched. "Clara knows you're just starting. She's not expecting perfection." But Lila wanted to be perfect, wanted to prove she was worth the kindness being shown to her, worth the risk Ethan was taking by keeping them. In the 3 weeks since they'd arrived at his ranch, she'd worked herself to exhaustion each day, cleaning, cooking, mending, anything to justify their presence. Ethan had told her to stop, to rest, to act like a child, but Lila couldn't afford to be a child. Children were helpless, dependent, easily discarded. The ride into town was quiet, Daisy dozing against Lila's shoulder while Ethan guided the wagon along the familiar rutted road. Ashford was just waking up when they arrived, shopkeepers sweeping boardwalks and raising awnings for the day ahead. A few people called greetings to Ethan, their eyes lingering on Lila and Daisy with curiosity that had become almost routine. Clara was waiting at the store's back entrance, her dark hair already escaping its pins despite the early hour. She smiled when she saw them, a warm expression that reached her eyes. Right on time. Come on back. I've got the workroom set up. The workroom was a small space behind the main store, lined with shelves holding jars of dried herbs, bottles of oils and tinctures, mortars and pestles in various sizes. A long table dominated the center, its surface scarred from years of use. Sunlight streamed through a window that overlooked a garden bursting with green growth. Daisy, those books are over there by the rocking chair, Clara said, pointing to a cozy corner. And there's milk and cookies on the small table if you get hungry. Daisy's eyes went wide. Real cookies? Made them myself yesterday. Oatmeal with raisins. Clara turned to Lila. Now then, let's see what you already know. Tell me about willowbark. Lila took a breath, reaching for her mother's words. It helps with pain and fever. You boil the bark to make a tea, or you can grind it into powder and mix it with honey. But too much can cause stomach upset. Good. And chamomile? Settles the stomach, helps with sleep. Can be used for inflammation too. Lila was gaining confidence now. Mama used to make a compress with chamomile for bruises and swelling. Your mother taught you well. Clara moved to the shelves, running her fingers along the jars. The trick is knowing not just what each herb does, but how they work together. Combinations can be more powerful than single ingredients, but they can also be dangerous if you don't understand the interactions. She pulled down several jars, setting them on the work table. We're going to start with something simple, a salve for cuts and scrapes, calendula for healing, plantain for infection, beeswax as a base. I'll walk you through it today, and by the end of summer you should be able to make it yourself with your eyes closed. The morning passed in a blur of measuring and mixing, of Clara's patient explanations and Lila's careful notes. She learned to melt beeswax without burning it, to steep herbs at the right temperature, to strain the mixture through cheesecloth until it ran clear. Her hands grew sticky with wax and fragrant with oils, and she'd never been happier. Daisy sat in her corner, occasionally looking up from her picture books to watch with sleepy contentment. Clara brought her milk and cookies as promised, and later, an apple cut into precise slices. The woman seemed to have an instinct for what a child needed before the child knew it herself. It wasn't until they were cleaning up, washing mortars and pestles in a basin of hot water, that Clara spoke about anything beyond herbs and remedies. How are things at the ranch, really? Lila kept her eyes on the pestle she was scrubbing. Fine. Good. Ethan's been very kind. I'm sure he has, but I'm asking about you, about how you're managing. Clara's voice was gentle but persistent. You've lost your mother, your home, everything familiar. That's not something you just get over. The pestle blurred in Lila's vision. I don't have time to not be over it. Daisy needs me. And Ethan, he's doing so much for us. I can't be ungrateful by being sad. Oh, honey. Clara set down the jar she'd been drying and turned to Lila fully. Grief isn't ingratitude. It's love with nowhere to go. Your mother would want you to feel it, not bury it. If I start feeling it, I won't be able to stop. The words came out choked. And then who'll take care of Daisy? Who'll make sure we don't get separated? Clara's hand was warm on Lila's shoulder. You're 10 years old. You shouldn't have to carry all this alone. But I do. There's no one else. That's not true anymore. Clara squeezed gently. You have Ethan, and you have me now, if you'll let yourself. Lila wanted to believe it, wanted to let herself lean on these two adults who seemed willing to shoulder some of her burden, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. People left. People died. The only person she could truly count on was herself. Still, she managed a small nod. Thank you for the work, for teaching me. It's my pleasure. Clara released her shoulder and handed her a small cloth bag. Here, take this home. It's the salve we made today. If anyone at the ranch gets a scrape or cut, you'll know what to do. Lila took the bag, feeling the weight of it. Her first completed remedy, a piece of her mother's legacy carried forward. When Ethan came to collect them an hour later, he found Daisy asleep in the rocking chair and Lila carefully labeling jars under Clara's supervision. The two women exchanged a look that Lila didn't quite understand, something passing between them that needed no words. She's a natural, Clara said. Quick learner, steady hands. If she keeps at it, she'll be better than me by winter. I don't doubt it. Ethan's voice carried a note of pride that made Lila's chest warm. Ready to head home? Home. The word still felt strange, too good to be true, but Lila let herself hold it for a moment before nodding. The following Tuesday, everything changed. Lila was in the hen house gathering eggs when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Multiple riders, moving at a deliberate pace. She set down her basket and moved to the doorway, peering out to see three men dismounting near the house. One was Sheriff Morgan. The other two were strangers. One in a dark suit that marked him as city folk, the other younger, harder-faced, wearing a deputy's badge. Ethan emerged from the barn, his posture wary. Sheriff wasn't expecting a visit. Ethan. Morgan's voice was formal, official. This is Mr. Pemberton from the County Welfare Office and Deputy Clark. They've got some questions about your living situation. Lila's heart dropped into her stomach. She backed into the henhouse's shadows, watching through the crack in the door. The man in the suit, Pemberton, pulled out a notebook. Mr. Holt, I understand you are currently housing two minor girls, sisters aged 10 and 6. That's correct. Their mother died. They came to me for help, and I provided it. Ethan's voice was level, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders. And what is your relationship to these children? None. I'm a neighbor who took them in when they had nowhere else to go. Pemberton wrote something in his notebook. I see. And you're unmarried, living alone on this property. I am. Mr. Holt, surely you can see how this situation appears. A single man, two young girls, no proper supervision. They're supervised by me. Ethan's voice had gone cold. They're fed, clothed, educated in practical skills, and treated with respect and dignity. What more do you want? What I want is irrelevant. The county has guidelines for the care of orphaned children, and this arrangement doesn't meet them. Pemberton snapped his notebook shut. I'm going to need to speak with the girls, separately. No. The word was flat, absolute. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward. Ethan, don't make this harder than it has to be. Let them ask their questions, confirm the girls are being treated properly, and maybe we can work something out. Work what out? You want to take them away, put them in some institution where they'll be separated and forgotten. I won't allow it. It's not your decision to allow or disallow. Pemberton's voice was clipped. I have the authority to remove children from unsuitable living situations. And Mr. Holt, this is unsuitable by definition. Lila's hands were shaking. She looked around the henhouse wildly, as if there might be some escape, some way to make this not be happening. Through the open door, she could see Daisy's face at the upstairs window, pressed against the glass. Give me 2 weeks, Ethan said suddenly. 2 weeks to make the situation more acceptable to your county guidelines. 2 weeks to do what? To get married. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the chickens seemed to hold their breath. Pemberton recovered first. Married? To whom, exactly? To Clara Whitmore. She runs the general store in town. She's a widow, and she's already been helping with the girls. With her in the household, you'd have your proper supervision. Sheriff Morgan was staring at Ethan like he'd grown a second head. Have you even asked Clara about this? Not yet, but I will. This is highly irregular. Pemberton was frowning. A marriage of convenience to circumvent county welfare guidelines. It's not circumventing anything. You want a proper household? I'm offering to provide one. 2 adults, stable income, respectable standing in the community. Unless you have another objection? Pemberton's jaw worked. Fine. 2 weeks. But I'll need written confirmation from Miss Whitmore that she's agreed to this arrangement and I'll be conducting a home visit after the wedding to ensure the situation is legitimate. If I find anything amiss, anything at all, those girls go to county care. Understood? Understood. The men mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Ethan standing alone in the yard. Lila watched him stand there for a long moment, his head bowed before he straightened and turned toward the house. She met him at the kitchen door, Daisy clutched in her arms. Her sister was crying silently, her face buried in Lila's shoulder. "I'm sorry," Lila whispered. "This is our fault. We've ruined everything." "No," Ethan's voice was firm. "You didn't ruin anything. You're children who needed help, and I chose to help you. The county's the one making this complicated. But marriage, you can't just marry someone because of us." "Why not?" He pulled out a chair and sat heavily. "Clara's a good woman. We get along well enough. It's not a love match, but it's practical, and right now practical is what we need." "But what if she says no?" Daisy's voice was muffled against Lila's shoulder. Ethan was quiet for a moment. "Then we'll figure something else out. But I don't think she'll say no." He was right. When Ethan rode into town that afternoon and laid out the situation to Clara Whitmore, she listened with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. Then, when he'd finished, she asked a single question. "Those girls, if I say no, what happens to them?" "They get sent to county care, probably separated. Lila to one family or institution, Daisy to another." Clara looked out the window of her store toward the mountains rising in the distance. She'd been a widow for 5 years, her husband lost to a logging accident that left her with nothing but the store and a future of careful, lonely independence. She'd made peace with it, or so she'd told herself. "When?" she asked. "The county gave me 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Clara laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Not much time to plan a wedding." "Clara, you don't have to, Yes, I do." She turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "Those girls have lost everything. I won't be the reason they lose each other too. Besides, I've been alone long enough. Maybe it's time to try something different." "This isn't a real marriage. It's an arrangement to satisfy the county." "I know what it is, Ethan. I'm not some girl with romantic notions." Claire's voice was steady. "But I'm also not fool enough to think that's all it has to be. We're both practical people. We both care about those children. That's more than some marriages start with." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You deserve better than this." "Maybe, but maybe this is exactly what I need." She held out her hand. 2 weeks from Saturday. Small ceremony, just what's necessary. And Ethan, we do this, we do it right. I won't have people saying those girls are living in some sham household. He shook her hand, her grip firm and sure. Agreed. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Clara closed the store for 2 days to sew a simple but elegant dress in dove gray. Lila helped, her stitches small and even as she hemmed the skirt and attached lace to the cuffs. Daisy picked wildflowers from the meadow and tied them into bouquets with ribbon Clara provided. Ethan cleaned the house from top to bottom, making space in the bedroom he'd occupied alone for 2 years, moving his things to make room for Clara's. He was quiet through it all, his face unreadable, and Lila worried that she'd forced him into something he'd regret. But when she tried to apologize again, he cut her off. "Stop. This isn't something being done to me, Lila. It's something I'm choosing. Clara's choosing it too. We're both adults making a decision we think is right." "But you don't love her." "I don't know her well enough to love her yet. But I respect her, I trust her, and I think we can build something good together. That's enough to start with." The wedding took place on a Saturday morning in the small church at the edge of town. The guest list was minimal. Sheriff Morgan and his wife, the preacher, Lila, and Daisy. Clara wore her gray dress and carried Daisy's wildflowers. Ethan wore his Sunday suit, the one he'd been married in the first time, and if his hands shook slightly when he placed the simple gold band on Clara's finger, no one mentioned it. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The words were plain, unremarkable, but they carried the weight of transformation. Clara was no longer just Clara Whitmore, shopkeeper and widow. She was Clara Holt, wife and guardian, and Ethan, who'd spent 2 years in isolation mourning what he'd lost, was no longer alone. They sealed it with a brief, chaste kiss, and Daisy clapped her hands with delight. The week after the wedding, Mr. Pemberton returned for his inspection. He walked through the house with narrowed eyes, checking the girls' room, examining the kitchen, questioning Clara about her intentions, and Ethan about his plans. "The children sleep where?" he asked. "Upstairs, second bedroom." It was my daughter's room. Ethan's voice was steady. "They're comfortable there." "And you and Mrs. Holt?" "Share the master bedroom, as married couples do." Clara's voice was cool. "Was there something improper you were expecting to find, Mr. Pemberton?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "No, ma'am, just ensuring everything is as represented." "It is. Those girls are safe, cared for, and loved. Is there anything else you need?" Pemberton closed his notebook. "For now, this arrangement appears satisfactory. However, the county will continue to monitor the situation. If circumstances change, they won't." Ethan stepped forward, his presence suddenly imposing. "This is their home now, legally, morally, and in every way that matters. Unless you have legitimate cause for concern, I expect this to be your last visit." The two men stared at each other, and for a moment Lila thought Pemberton might push back, but then he nodded curtly and made for the door. "I'll file my report with the county. Good day to you both." When he was gone, Clara sagged against the kitchen counter, her carefully maintained composure cracking. That was terrifying. "You did well." Ethan touched her shoulder briefly. "Thank you for all of this. We're in this together now." Clara straightened, managed a shaky smile. "For better or worse, as they say." From the doorway, Lila watched them, these two strangers who'd become family through sheer force of will and determination to do right by two orphaned girls. They weren't in love, didn't pretend to be. But there was something solid between them, something that felt like it might grow into more given time. That night, as Lila lay in bed with Daisy warm beside her, she heard the low murmur of conversation from downstairs. Clara and Ethan talking in the quiet way of people learning each other's rhythms. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was gentle, careful. "Lila?" Daisy's whisper was soft. "Is Miss Clara going to stay forever?" "She's Mrs. Holt now, and yes, I think she is." "Good." Daisy snuggled closer. "I like her. She smells like cinnamon, and she knows good stories." "Me too, Daisy. Me too." But even as she said it, even as relief washed over her that they were safe for now, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this fragile peace was too good to last. In her experience, good things had a way of being snatched away just when you'd started to believe in them. She was right to worry. 2 weeks later, a man rode up to the ranch on a fine bay horse, dressed in clothes too expensive for honest work. He dismounted with the confidence of someone used to getting his way and knocked on the door with 3 sharp raps. Clara answered, wiping flour from her hands. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for 2 girls, Lila and Daisy Carter. I have reason to believe they're residing here." Something in his tone made Clara's spine stiffen. "And you are?" "Victor Carter, their uncle." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I've come to take my nieces home." Clara didn't step back from the doorway, didn't invite him in. Instead, she crossed her arms and met Victor Carter's eyes with the kind of steady gaze that had served her well in business dealings with men who thought a widow would be easy to manipulate. "Their uncle," she repeated. "Funny. Those girls have been here nearly 2 months, and this is the first we're hearing of any uncle." Victor's smile tightened. "I've been out of state, working a claim in Colorado. Only just heard about my sister's passing. Tragic business, truly tragic." His eyes moved past Clara, scanning the interior of the house. "Where are they? I'd like to see my nieces." "They're not available at the moment." Clara's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "And even if they were, I'd need more than your word that you're who you claim to be. Anyone can ride up and say they're family." "I have papers." Victor reached into his coat, pulled out a folded document. "Birth records showing Lila and Daisy as daughters of my late brother, Thomas Carter. That makes me their legal guardian by blood right." Clara took the papers but didn't look at them. "You'll need to speak with my husband about this. He's the one who took the girls in initially." "Your husband?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "And who might that be?" "Ethan Holt. He owns this ranch." Clara turned her head slightly, calling over her shoulder. Ethan, we have a visitor. Ethan emerged from the back of the house, taking in the stranger on his doorstep with one swift, assessing glance. Whatever he saw there made his jaw tighten. Mr. Holt, Victor extended his hand. Victor Carter, I believe you're sheltering my nieces. Ethan ignored the offered hand. So you claim. What do you want? What any uncle would want, to care for his brother's children, to give them a proper home with their own blood. Victor dropped his hand, his expression turning sorrowful. I know you meant well, taking them in like you did. Charitable of you, but they belong with family now. They are with family. Ethan's voice was flat. They've been here for 2 months. They're settled, safe, cared for. I have legal guardianship pending, approved by the county. Pending being the key word. Victor's smile returned. No judge is going to choose strangers over blood when a willing relative steps forward. Those girls are Carters. They belong with a Carter. From upstairs, Lila pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd been reading when she'd heard the knock, when she'd heard that voice, a voice she remembered from early childhood, from before her father died, from visits that had always left her mother tight-lipped and anxious. Uncle Victor. The brother her father had cut ties with years ago, the one her mother had warned her about in the journal. Lila? Daisy appeared in the doorway, her doll clutched tight. Who's that man? Why does he sound angry? Shh. Lila put her finger to her lips. Stay quiet and stay up here. But, please, Daisy, trust me. Downstairs, the conversation had moved into the parlor. Lila crept to the top of the stairs, positioning herself where she could hear without being seen. The girls walked to my property half-starved and desperate, Ethan was saying. Where were you then? Where were you when their mother was dying? When they had no food, no shelter, nowhere to turn? I told you I was in Colorado. If I'd known about Margaret's condition, you would have done what? Rushed to her side? Clara's voice cut in, sharp and disbelieving. From what I understand, you hadn't seen your brother's family in over 5 years, didn't send money, didn't write, didn't check on them after Thomas died. Now, suddenly, you're concerned? Victor's tone shifted, became defensive. My relationship with my brother was complicated, but those girls are still my blood, still my responsibility. Responsibility. Ethan spat the word like it tasted foul. You don't know the first thing about responsibility. Lila's 10 years old, and she's been more responsible than you've ever been. She kept her sister alive, walked her 3 miles in the heat to find help, worked herself to exhaustion trying to earn her keep. That's responsibility. What you're doing is something else entirely. And what would you call it, Mr. Holt? The silence that followed made Lila lean forward, straining to hear. I'd call it opportunism, Ethan said finally. Those girls inherited something from their father, didn't they? Mining rights or a claim or property. Something valuable enough to bring you all the way from Colorado. Victor laughed, but there was no humor in it. You've got an active imagination. I'm here for my family, nothing more. Then you won't mind if we verify that with the county land office. See what claims are registered in Thomas Carter's name, what the inheritance laws say about 2 minor daughters. The quality of the silence changed. Lila could almost feel Victor recalculating, adjusting his approach. Look, he said, his voice turning reasonable. I can see you've grown attached to the girls. That's natural, but I'm their blood uncle, their only living relative. When this goes before a judge, and it will go before a judge, he's going to rule in my favor. That's just how the law works. So why don't you save everyone the trouble and let me take them now? I'll make sure they're well cared for. No, Claire's voice was absolute. Those girls don't leave this house unless a judge orders it, and even then, we'll fight you every step of the way. Mrs. Holt, you seem like a sensible woman. Surely you understand. I understand that you're not getting near those children without a court order. Now I think it's time for you to leave. Lila heard footsteps moving toward the door. She scrambled back from the stairs as Victor's voice carried up. You're making a mistake, both of you. I'm trying to do this the easy way, but if you insist on being difficult, I'll go through legal channels, and when I do, you'll wish you'd cooperated. The door slammed. Lila ran to the window in time to see Victor mount his horse and ride off, his back rigid with anger. Ethan and Clara stood in the yard, watching him go. He's after something, Clara said quietly. You're right about that. No man shows up after 2 months claiming uncle's rights without an ulterior motive. I need to ride into town, talk to Sheriff Morgan, find out what Victor might be after. Can you? I'll stay with the girls. Go. Clara turned back to the house, her expression grim. But Ethan? We need to be prepared for a fight. If he takes this to court, blood rights carry weight. Then we'll find another way to fight. Ethan was already moving toward the barn. We didn't save those girls just to hand them over to someone who sees them as property. When Clara came back inside, she found Lila sitting on the stairs, her face white. You heard? It wasn't a question. Lila nodded. Clara sat down beside her, her movements weary. What do you know about your Uncle Victor? Not much. Papa never talked about him. But Mama... Lila's hands twisted together. She wrote about him in her journal, said he was trouble, said he only cared about money and himself. She wrote that if anything happened to her, I should keep Daisy away from him no matter what. Do you know why? She said he'd use us for whatever we were worth and then discard us, like we were tools, not people. Lila looked at Clara with desperate eyes. He can't take us. Please. He can't. We won't let him. Clara pulled Lila close, and the girl let herself lean into the embrace, let herself be 10 years old and scared for just a moment. But Lila, I need you to be honest with me. Is there something you inherited from your father? Something valuable? Lila pulled back, thinking. I don't. Papa worked in the mines, but he didn't own them. He was just a laborer. When he died, there was nothing. We had to leave the company housing. Mama had to take in washing to feed us. If there was money or property, we never saw it. But there might have been something. A claim he filed, rights to a site, something registered in his name that you and Daisy would inherit as his daughters. I don't know. Mama never mentioned anything like that. But even as Lila said it, she remembered something, a conversation she'd half heard years ago, her father and another miner talking in low voices about a promising vein, about filing a claim, about keeping it quiet until they knew for sure. She'd been 6, maybe 7, too young to understand, too young to ask questions. Had her father filed a claim? Was there something out there worth fighting over? Ethan returned 2 hours later with Sheriff Morgan and a thin man in spectacles who introduced himself as James Sullivan, the county clerk. Miss Lila, Sullivan said gently, sitting across from her at the kitchen table. I need to ask you some questions about your father. Can you tell me his full name? Thomas Michael Carter. And he worked at which mining operation? The Copper Ridge mine, until it collapsed. That's how he died. Sullivan made notes in a leather-bound book. The Copper Ridge operation. That's interesting, very interesting indeed. He looked up at Ethan. 3 months before the collapse, Thomas Carter filed a claim on a section of land adjacent to the main mine. Independent claim, not part of the company operation. He never developed it, died before he could. But the claim is still registered, still valid. What's it worth? Clara asked. That's hard to say without proper surveying, but given its location and the mineral content in the area, Sullivan paused. Could be considerable, enough that certain individuals might be very interested in obtaining rights to it. By obtaining rights, you mean taking custody of Thomas Carter's daughters? Ethan's voice was grim. Legally, as the girl's guardian, their uncle would have control of any inherited property until they come of age. He could develop the claim, sell it, do whatever he wished with it. The girls themselves wouldn't see a penny until they turned 18, if then. Lila felt sick. So he doesn't want us. He wants what we inherited. I'm afraid that appears to be the case, yes. Sullivan closed his book. However, there's a complication. Mr. Victor Carter filed for custody this afternoon. The hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday. That's 4 days away, Clara said sharply. Surely we can postpone, give us time to prepare. He requested an expedited hearing on the grounds that the girls are living with strangers and should be with family as quickly as possible. Judge Patterson agreed. Sullivan looked apologetic. I'm sorry. I know this isn't much time. After the men left, the house fell into a tense silence. Daisy had been sent upstairs, spared the details of what was happening, but Lila sat with Ethan and Clara at the kitchen table as the sun set outside the windows. We need evidence, Ethan said finally. Proof that Victor isn't fit to be their guardian, that he's after the money, not the girls. How do we prove intent? Clara rubbed her temples. We all know it, but knowing and proving are different things. Mama's journal, Lila said suddenly. She wrote about Victor, about warning Papa to stay away from him, about not trusting him. Would that help? Ethan and Clara exchanged glances. It might, Ethan said, if we can show a pattern of behavior, of your mother's concerns about his character. Can you find the specific passages? I can try. Lila stood, then hesitated. What if it's not enough? What if the judge doesn't care what Mama wrote? Then we'll find another way. Clara's voice was fierce. But we're not giving up without a fight. Lila spent that evening and the next day going through her mother's journal, page by page, marking passages with strips of cloth. There weren't many references to Victor. Her mother had clearly tried not to think about him, but what was there painted a damning picture? Thomas's brother came by today asking for money again. I told him Thomas wasn't home. Victor has that look in his eyes, the one that says he sees people as things to be used. I don't want him near my girls. Victor wrote asking about Thomas's mining work. Wants to know if he struck anything valuable. I didn't write back. That man would sell his own mother if the price was right. Thomas finally told Victor to stay away, said he was tired of being seen as nothing but a source of money and opportunities. Victor's response was ugly. Threatened to contest Thomas's claim to the land if he didn't cut him in. Thomas told him to try it. I'm glad my husband has a backbone, but I worry what Victor might do if he gets desperate. The final entry was dated 2 weeks before her mother's death, written in handwriting so shaky Lila could barely read it. If anything happens to me, someone needs to know. Victor must not get his hands on the girls or the claim. He's already written twice asking about my plans for Lila and Daisy. Plans. Like their property to be distributed. Promise me, whoever reads this, keep them away from him. He'll use them and discard them and never think twice about the damage he causes. Lila traced her mother's words with one finger, feeling the weight of that promise. Her mother had known Victor would come, had tried to protect them even from beyond the grave. The days before the hearing blurred together in a haze of preparation. Ethan hired a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Martha Hayes who'd handled property disputes and had a reputation for not backing down from fights. Clara gathered character witnesses, shopkeepers who'd seen how well Lila and Daisy were cared for, neighbors who could attest to the Holtz character, even the preacher who'd married them. And Lila practiced. Martha Hayes sat with her at the kitchen table and walked her through what would happen in court, what kinds of questions she might be asked, how to speak clearly and calmly, even if she was scared. The judge may ask you directly about your uncle, Martha said, about whether you want to live with him. What will you say? The truth. That I don't know him. That Mama warned me about him. That Daisy and I want to stay here. Lila's voice was steady, but her hands shook in her lap. Good. Truth is our strongest weapon, but Lila, you need to be prepared. The judge might not listen. He might decide that blood trumps everything else. If that happens, we'll appeal. Ethan spoke from the doorway. We'll take it to a higher court if we have to, whatever it takes. Martha nodded approvingly. That's the spirit, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. Tuesday morning arrived cold and gray, clouds hanging low over the mountains like a held breath. Lila dressed in her best dress, the blue calico Clara had given her, carefully pressed and mended. Daisy wore yellow, her hair in neat braids tied with ribbon. They looked like children who were loved, who were cared for. Lila hoped it would be enough. The courthouse in Ashford was a square brick building that seemed designed to intimidate. Inside, the courtroom was paneled in dark wood with high windows that let in thin light. Rows of benches faced the judge's elevated desk, and the whole space smelled of old paper and stale air. Victor was already there with his own lawyer, a barrel-chested man named Graves, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Victor himself was dressed in a fine suit, his hair slicked back, his expression appropriately solemn. He looked like a concerned uncle, looked like someone who cared. Lila hated him on sight. Judge Patterson was an older man with white hair and a face carved into permanent severity. He called the court to order and listened as both lawyers presented their opening statements. Graves spoke about blood rights, about the importance of family, about how two orphaned girls belonged with their last living relative. Martha Hayes countered with facts: the girls' well-being, their integration into the Holt household, the stable home they'd found. Then Victor took the stand. He spoke eloquently about his grief at losing his brother, his regret at not being there for his sister-in-law in her final days. He talked about family bonds and duty and how he'd traveled all this way to make things right. "I understand the Holts have been kind to my nieces," he said, his voice heavy with false sincerity. "And I'm grateful for that. But kindness doesn't replace blood. Those girls are Carters. They should be raised by a Carter, taught their family history, given their rightful inheritance." "And what inheritance would that be, Mr. Carter?" Martha Hayes stood, her voice sharp. Victor blinked. "I'm sorry?" "You mentioned their rightful inheritance. What specifically are you referring to?" "Just whatever their father left them. Personal effects, family mementos. Not, for instance, the mining claim registered in Thomas Carter's name, the one located on potentially valuable land adjacent to the old Copper Ridge site." Victor's face went carefully blank. "I'm sure I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because according to county records, you made inquiries about that very claim 2 weeks ago. Asked about its status, its value, who held rights to it." Martha held up a paper. "I have the clerk's testimony right here." Judge Patterson leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, are you aware of this mining claim?" I may have heard something about it, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here for my nieces." "Who just happened to be the legal heirs to a potentially valuable piece of property?" Martha's voice was cold. "How convenient." "Objection." Graves was on his feet. "Counsel is making assumptions about my client's motivations without evidence." "Then let's talk about evidence." Martha pulled out the journal. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a journal kept by Margaret Carter, the girl's late mother. In it, she repeatedly expresses concerns about Victor Carter's character and explicitly states her wish that he never gain custody of her daughters. She read the passages aloud, each word landing like a hammer blow. Victor's face grew redder with each sentence. His jaw clenched so tight, Lila thought she could hear his teeth grinding from across the room. When Martha finished, Judge Patterson sat back in his chair. "Strong words from a dying woman. Mr. Carter, do you have any explanation for why your sister-in-law would write such things?" "She was ill, confused. Grief and sickness can make people say things they don't mean." But Victor's voice lacked conviction now. "The court will take a brief recess. When we return, I want to hear from the girls themselves." Judge Patterson stood. 15 minutes? The recess felt like hours. Lila sat on a bench in the hallway with Clara's arm around her, Daisy pressed tight against her other side. Ethan paced, his boots echoing on the marble floor. Martha Hayes reviewed her notes with quick, efficient movements. "You're doing well," she told Lila. "Just a little longer. Can you hold on?" Lila nodded, though her stomach was churning. She was about to testify, about to stand in front of a judge in a room full of strangers and tell them why she deserved to stay with Ethan and Clara, why blood shouldn't matter more than love. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Patterson called Lila to the stand. She walked up on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The judge's voice was gentler than she'd expected. "Lila, I know this is frightening, but I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "How long have you been living with the Holts?" "Almost 3 months, sir." "And during that time, have they treated you well?" "Yes, sir. Very well. They've fed us and clothed us and taught us, and—" her voice wavered. "They've made us feel safe, like we matter." "I see." The judge made a note. "What about your uncle? Do you remember him?" "A little, from when I was younger, but Papa told him to stay away and we never saw him after that." "Why do you think your father did that?" Lila took a breath. "Because Uncle Victor only cared about money, about what he could get from people. Mama wrote about it in her journal. She said he saw people as things to be used." "Those are serious accusations from a young girl." "They're not accusations, sir. They're the truth." Lila met the judge's eyes. "My mother was dying when she wrote those warnings. Why would she lie? What would she gain by making up stories about her own brother-in-law? She wanted us safe. That's all. She wanted us away from someone who'd hurt us. Judge Patterson was quiet for a long moment. And what about the mining claim? Did you know about it before all this? No, sir. If Mama knew, she never told me. We didn't have any money, never had anything valuable. If there was a claim, it didn't help us when we were starving. But it might help your uncle if he had custody of you. Yes, sir. I think that's why he's really here. Victor's lawyer objected, but the judge waved him off. The child is answering my questions honestly. Sit down, Mr. Graves. He turned back to Lila. One more question. If I were to award custody to your uncle, what would you do? Lila felt her heart hammering. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. I'd run, she said quietly. I'd take Daisy and I'd run, and we'd keep running until we found somewhere safe. Because I promised my mother I'd protect my sister, and I won't break that promise. Not for blood, not for law, not for anything. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Patterson studied her for a long moment, this 10-year-old girl with eyes far older than her years, with a spine of pure steel and a fierce love that wouldn't bend. You can step down, he said finally. Daisy testified next, though her answers were simpler, delivered in a small voice that nonetheless carried certainty. Yes, she was happy with the Holts. No, she didn't remember Uncle Victor. Yes, she wanted to stay with Lila, always with Lila. Then Clara took the stand and spoke about what the girls had come to mean to her, about the family they'd built together. Ethan followed, his testimony clipped and factual, but underlaid with emotion he didn't bother to hide. Finally, Judge Patterson called for closing arguments. Victor's lawyer made one last attempt to appeal to blood and tradition, but his heart wasn't in it. The damage was done. Martha Hayes stood and spoke directly to the judge. Your Honor, this case isn't about blood versus strangers. It's about what's best for two children who've already lost everything. The Holts have given them a home, stability, love. Mr. Carter has given them nothing but fear. The law may say blood comes first, but these girls are telling you, begging you, to listen to something more important than genetics. Listen to their mother's dying wishes. Listen to their own voices. And make the choice that protects them, not the one that serves a man who sees them as a path to profit. Judge Patterson was silent for a long time after that. He looked at his notes, looked at Victor, looked at the Holts. Finally, his gaze settled on Lila and Daisy, huddled together on their bench. I've heard enough, he said. I'm ready to make my ruling. The room held its collective breath. Judge Patterson removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief, the small gesture drawing out the tension until Lila thought she might shatter from it. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years on the bench, of difficult decisions made and lived with. This court has heard compelling arguments from both sides. Mr. Carter has presented his claim based on blood relation, which traditionally carries significant weight in custody matters. However, the evidence presented by the defense raises serious questions about Mr. Carter's motivations and fitness as a guardian. Victor's face had gone carefully neutral, but Lila could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the table in front of him. The testimony of Margaret Carter, preserved in her journal and corroborated by her daughter's accounts, suggests a pattern of behavior that gives this court pause. A dying woman's explicit instructions regarding her children's welfare cannot be dismissed lightly. Furthermore, the timing of Mr. Carter's sudden interest in his nieces, coinciding directly with the discovery of their inheritance, speaks to intent that has little to do with familial affection. Judge Patterson put his spectacles back on and looked directly at Victor. Mr. Carter, I find your claim to be motivated primarily by financial gain rather than genuine concern for these children's well-being. The court cannot in good conscience place two vulnerable girls in the custody of a man their own mother feared and distrusted. Victor surged to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Those are my brother's children. Sit down, Mr. Carter. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. I'm not finished. Victor sat, his face mottled red with fury. As for the Holts, Judge Patterson continued, the evidence shows they have provided exemplary care for Lila and Daisy Carter. The girls are healthy, educated, emotionally stable, and clearly bonded to their guardians. Mrs. Holt's marriage to Mr. Holt, while perhaps expedited by circumstances, appears to be a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to these children's welfare. Lila felt Clara's hand find hers, squeezing tight. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that custody of Lila Mae Carter and Daisy Rose Carter is hereby awarded to Ethan and Clara Holt. Full legal guardianship is granted, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. The mining claim registered in Thomas Carter's name shall be held in trust for the girls until they reach the age of majority, with the Holts serving as trustees. Mr. Victor Carter's petition for custody is denied. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo in Lila's chest. For a moment, she couldn't process what she'd heard, couldn't quite believe it was real. Furthermore, the judge added, his voice hardening, I'm ordering that Mr. Carter have no contact with these children unless they themselves request it once they're of age. Any attempt to circumvent this order will result in legal consequences. Do you understand, Mr. Carter? Victor's lawyer put a hand on his arm, whispering urgently, but Victor shook him off. This isn't over. I'll appeal. I'll take this to a higher court. You're welcome to try, Judge Patterson said mildly, but I doubt you'll find a more sympathetic ear. The evidence against your character is substantial, and your motivation's transparent. Now I suggest you leave my courtroom before I cite you for contempt. Victor stood, his chair scraping loud against the floor. He looked at Lila and Daisy with eyes that promised retribution, and Lila felt a chill run down her spine. But then Ethan was there, stepping between them, his presence solid and immovable. You heard the judge, Ethan said quietly. Time to go. For a moment, Lila thought Victor might try something, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw working. But then Sheriff Morgan appeared at his elbow, one hand resting casually on his gun belt, and Victor seemed to deflate. This isn't over, he repeated, but the words lacked conviction now. He turned and stalked from the courtroom, his lawyer scrambling to follow. The silence he left behind was profound. Then Daisy broke it with a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh, throwing herself at Clara with such force the woman staggered backward. We can stay? We really can stay. You really can stay. Clara's voice was thick with tears. You're ours now, legally and officially. Lila felt hands on her shoulders and looked up to find Ethan crouched beside her bench, his sage green eyes bright with emotion he didn't bother to hide. You were brave in there, he said, braver than most adults I know. Your mother would be proud. The words broke something loose in Lila's chest. She'd been holding herself together for so long, through her mother's death, through the walk to the ranch, through weeks of uncertainty and the terror of the hearing. But now, with victory finally won, the dam broke. She folded forward into Ethan's arms and cried like the 10-year-old child she was, letting out weeks of fear and grief and desperate hope. Ethan held her and said nothing, just let her cry herself empty, while Clara comforted Daisy and Martha Hayes packed up her papers with a satisfied smile. Judge Patterson waited until Lila had composed herself before calling them back to his bench. His severe expression had softened slightly. Mr. and Mrs. Holt, you've taken on a significant responsibility. These girls have been through trauma that would break many adults. They'll need patience, stability, and unconditional love. Can you provide that? Yes, Your Honor. Claire and Ethan spoke in unison, then shared a brief smile. Good. Then I wish you all the best. The judge looked at Lila and Daisy. Young ladies, you've found yourselves a good home. Don't take it for granted. We won't, Lila promised, her voice still rough from crying. Thank you, sir, for listening to us. That's my job. Though I'll admit, not every child argues their case as effectively as you did. Judge Patterson allowed himself a small smile. You've got your mother's strength in you. Use it well. The walk out of the courthouse felt surreal, like moving through a dream. People lingered on the steps outside. Witnesses who'd testified, townspeople who'd heard about the case and come to see the outcome. Lila saw Clara's friends from the store, the preacher who'd married the Holts, even a few miners who'd known her father. Congratulations, one of them said, tipping his hat. Tom Carter was a good man. He'd be glad to know his girls are in good hands. The ride back to the ranch was quiet but not uncomfortable. Daisy fell asleep against Clara's shoulder, exhausted by the day's emotions. Lila sat on Clara's other side, watching the familiar landscape roll past. The sage-covered hills, the distant mountains, the sky so vast it seemed to swallow everything. "What happens to the mining claim?" she asked after a while. "The one Papa filed?" Ethan glanced over from the driver's seat. "It's yours and Daisy's, held in trust until you're 18. We can't touch the money from it except to provide for your needs, education, medical care, that sort of thing. The judge will appoint an independent trustee to oversee it and make sure everything's handled properly." "Will it be worth much?" "Hard to say until it's surveyed properly. Could be a fortune, could be nothing. But either way, it's not why we fought for you. You understand that, right?" Lila nodded. She did understand. Ethan and Clara had wanted them, actually wanted them, not for what they owned, but for who they were. What if Uncle Victor tries to come back anyway? The fear hadn't quite left her yet. What if he doesn't listen to the judge? "Then he'll deal with me." Ethan's voice was flat, final. "And with Sheriff Morgan and with every person in this town who saw what he really is. He won't get near you again, Lila, I promise you that." Clara's arm tightened around her. "You're safe now, both of you. This is your home, and nothing's going to change that." The ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent, painting the house and barn in shades of amber and gold. Lila had seen it dozens of times over the past months, but today it looked different. Today it looked like what it was: home. That night, after Daisy had been tucked into bed and Clara had gone downstairs to finish cleaning up from dinner, Lila sat at the small desk in their room and pulled out her mother's journal. She turned to the first blank page and picked up a pencil. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she found her rhythm. "Dear Mama, we won. The judge said we can stay with Ethan and Clara. Uncle Victor can't take us away. I know you were worried about him, and I want you to know we're safe from him now. I miss you every day. Sometimes I wake up and forget you're gone, and then I remember and it hurts all over again. But Daisy's doing better. She smiles more now. She has a kitten named Butterscotch, and she helps Clara in the garden, and she's started calling Ethan Papa Ethan, even though he told her she doesn't have to. Clara's been teaching me your remedies and showing me new ones too. I'm getting good at it. Last week, Mrs. Henderson from town came in with a terrible cough, and I made her a syrup with honey and thyme and horehound, and she said it worked better than anything the doctor gave her. I thought you'd like knowing that your knowledge is helping people. I don't know if you can see us from wherever you are, but if you can, I hope you're proud. I hope you know we're okay. We're more than okay. We're loved. I'll take care of Daisy just like I promised, and I'll make you proud. I'll be strong and kind and brave, all the things you taught me to be. I love you, Mama. Always. Lila." She set down the pencil and wiped her eyes. The grief was still there. Would probably always be there in some form, but it felt different now. Less like drowning and more like carrying something precious, something she could bear. A soft knock on the door made her look up. Clara stood in the doorway, her hair down and her expression gentle. "Thought you might like some tea before bed. Chamomile with honey." "Thank you." Lila took the cup, inhaling the familiar scent. "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you say yes? To marrying Ethan, I mean. You could have said no. Let us go to the county, kept your life the way it was." Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. "I could have. And for about 5 minutes after Ethan asked me, I thought about it. Thought about how complicated it would make things, how people might talk, how it would change everything. But you said yes anyway. I said yes because I looked at you and Daisy and I saw children who deserved a chance, who deserved to be loved and protected and given a real home. And I thought about my life, my quiet, safe, lonely life. And I realized I'd been just existing, not really living. You girls gave me a reason to live again." Lila felt her throat tighten. "We're lucky to have you." "I think we're lucky to have each other." Clara reached out and smoothed Lila's hair back from her face. "This family we've built, it's not conventional. We're not related by blood, we didn't start out loving each other, but we chose each other, and that means something. Maybe it means more than blood ever could." After Clara left, Lila finished her tea and climbed into bed beside Daisy. Her sister murmured in her sleep and rolled closer, one small hand reaching out to grasp Lila's nightgown. Lila covered that hand with her own and closed her eyes. The weeks that followed fell into a new rhythm, one marked by normalcy and small joys rather than fear and uncertainty. Clara officially hired Lila as her apprentice at the store, paying her a small wage that went into a savings jar on Lila's dresser. Daisy started attending the small schoolhouse in town 3 days a week, coming home with slate covered in careful letters and stories about the friends she was making. Ethan taught them both to ride, Daisy on a gentle mare named Clover, Lila on a spirited gelding called Sage, who matched her independent spirit. They spent Sunday afternoons exploring the ranch, Ethan pointing out property lines and teaching them to read the land the way he did, to see not just dirt and grass, but potential and possibility. The mining claim was surveyed and found to contain a substantial vein of silver. The trustee appointed by the court, a banker from the county seat with a reputation for scrupulous honesty, set up accounts for both girls and began the careful process of developing the claim with reputable partners. It would be years before any real money came from it, but the knowledge that their futures were secure took some weight off Lila's shoulders. Victor never appealed the judge's ruling. According to Sheriff Morgan, he'd left Wyoming entirely, heading back to Colorado with his tail between his legs. Lila didn't waste energy hating him. He was gone, and they were here, and that was all that mattered. One evening in late autumn, with the first snow dusting the mountain peaks and wood smoke curling from the chimney, Lila came downstairs to find Ethan at the kitchen table with a piece of wood and a set of carving tools. He'd taken up the hobby recently, his hands learning to create instead of just maintain. "What are you making?" she asked, sitting across from him. "Something for the mantel." He turned the wood so she could see the rough shape emerging. 4 figures, 2 tall and 2 small, standing side by side. "Thought it was time we had something that represented all of us." Lila watched his careful movements, the way he worked the grain with practiced patience. "Can I help?" "You can sand it when I'm done carving, if you'd like. Make it smooth." They worked in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds, the scrape of Ethan's tools and the crackling of the fire. Clara was upstairs reading to Daisy, their voices a soft murmur through the floorboards. "Ethan?" Lila waited until he looked up. "Thank you for everything, for taking us in, for fighting for us, for—" Her voice caught. "For not being too late." Something passed across Ethan's face, grief and gratitude and a fierce protectiveness that needed no words. He set down his tools and reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You and Daisy, you gave me a reason to be more than just a man waiting out his days. You gave me a family again, a purpose." He paused, his throat working. "Emma and Sarah, they'll always be part of me. But you girls, you're part of me too now, and that doesn't diminish what came before. It just means my heart's bigger than I thought it could be." Lila felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I think Mama would have liked you," she said, "and Clara too. She would have been glad to know we ended up here. I think I would have liked your mother. Any woman who could raise a daughter as brave and strong as you must have been something special." The carving took another week to complete. Ethan worked on it in the evenings, adding details, the suggestion of Clara's braid, the ribbon in Daisy's hair, the determined set of Lila's shoulders, his own weathered features softened by contentment. When it was finally finished, sanded smooth by Lila's patient hands and sealed with oil, he carved words into the base. The Holt family. Clara cried when she saw it. Daisy clapped her hands and insisted they put it up immediately, and Lila traced the carved figures with one finger, feeling the solid reality of them. 4 people who'd found each other through grief and chance and choice. 4 people who'd become a family not because they had to, but because they wanted to. They placed it on the mantel above the fireplace, right in the center where everyone who entered the house could see it. And that night, as Lila lay in bed listening to the wind whisper around the eaves and Daisy's soft breathing beside her, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. It had started with death and desperation, with a little girl pulling a sheet over her mother's still face and making the terrifying choice to walk into the unknown. It had continued through kindness and courage, through a marriage born of necessity and grown into something real, through a courtroom battle that could have ended in disaster. But it had ended here, in this warm room, in this solid house, with this family that loved her. It had ended with her mother's wishes honored, her sister safe and happy, and two adults who'd chosen them when they could have chosen the easier path of turning away. Lila closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "We're okay, Mama. We're more than okay. We're home." The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Lila woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, to the sound of Clara humming in the kitchen and Ethan's boots on the porch as he brought in firewood. Daisy was already up, probably helping Clara set the table, chattering about the kitten or school or whatever had captured her imagination. It was just another morning, just another day in the life they'd built together. And that, Lila thought, as she dressed and braided her hair and went downstairs to join her family, was everything. Clara was indeed in the kitchen, teaching Daisy how to flip pancakes without sending them flying across the room. Ethan came in with an armload of wood, stamping snow from his boots, his face reddened from the cold, but his eyes warm. They all looked up when Lila entered, and three voices spoke an overlapping greeting. "Morning, Lila." "I made pancakes. Well, Clara made them, but I helped. Coffee's hot if you want some." Lila poured herself a cup. She'd started taking it the way Ethan did, with just a splash of cream, and sat at the table. Clara put a stack of pancakes in front of her, golden and perfect, with butter melting into rivers of sweetness. Daisy climbed into the chair beside her, syrup already dripping from her chin. "We're going into town today," Clara announced, sitting down with her own plate. "Need to pick up supplies before the snow gets too deep. And Mrs. Henderson wants more of that cough syrup, Lila. She's been telling everyone in town how well it worked." "I can make a batch this afternoon," Lila said, "if we have enough horehound." "We do. I ordered extra last week." Clara smiled. "You're building quite a reputation. People are starting to call you the Remedy Girl." "Better than some things they could call me," Lila said with a slight smile. Ethan snorted into his coffee. "That's the truth." They ate breakfast together, talking about the day ahead, about the ranch work that needed doing, about whether the first real snow would hold off another week or come sooner. It was ordinary conversation, the kind families had over shared meals every day. But to Lila, who'd spent so long not knowing if she'd have food or shelter or safety, it felt miraculous. After breakfast, she helped Clara clean up while Ethan went out to check on the livestock and Daisy disappeared upstairs to play with her kitten. Clara washed, Lila dried, working in the synchronized rhythm they'd developed over months of shared chores. "You're quiet this morning," Clara observed. "Everything all right?" "Everything's perfect." Lila set a dried plate on the stack. "That's what I was thinking about. How perfect everything is, and how I never thought I'd get to feel this way again." Clara's hands stilled in the soapy water. "You've been through more than any child should have to bear. You're allowed to be happy now." "I know. It's just..." Lila struggled to find the words. "Sometimes I'm scared I'll wake up and it'll all be gone. That this is too good to last." "Oh, honey." Clara turned, her wet hands cupping Lila's face gently. "Nothing is promised in this life. I learned that when I lost my husband. Ethan learned it when he lost his family. But that doesn't mean we can't trust in what we have right now. This moment, this family, this home, it's real. And you deserve every bit of it." "So do you," Lila said. "You and Ethan both. You deserve to be happy too." Clara's smile was soft and genuine. "We are happy. Because of you girls. You brought light back into a house that had been dark too long." Later that afternoon, while Lila was in the workroom at the store preparing Mrs. Henderson's cough syrup, she heard the bell over the door jingle. She looked up to see Martha Hayes, the lawyer who'd represented them in court. "Miss Lila," Martha greeted her. "Martha, I was hoping I'd find you here. I have something for you." She pulled an envelope from her satchel and handed it over. Lila opened it carefully to find an official-looking document covered in legal language she only partially understood. "What is this?" "It's the final paperwork for your adoption," Martha explained. "The Holts filed it last month and it just came through. You and Daisy are now legally Lila and Daisy Holt. Not Carter anymore, unless you want to keep your birth name." Lila stared at the paper. Lila Mae Holt. The name looked strange and wonderful all at once. "They adopted us? Officially?" "Officially and legally. You're not just wards anymore, not just temporary guardianship. You're their daughters, with all the rights and protections that entails. Martha's expression was warm. They wanted it to be a surprise. Said to tell you there's no pressure to use the new name if you don't want to, but the option is there. After Martha left, Lila sat with the document in her hands, reading it over and over. Adopted, daughters. The words felt huge, transformative. She thought of her mother, of her father, of the Carter name that connected her to them. But she thought too of Ethan and Clara, of the family they'd chosen to become, of the name that would tie them together permanently. When the Holts came to pick her up that evening, Lila climbed into the wagon and looked at them both seriously. Martha Hayes came by today. She showed me the adoption papers. Clara and Ethan exchanged a glance. We wanted to tell you ourselves, Clara said, but the paperwork came through faster than expected. We know the Carter name means something to you, Ethan added. We're not trying to erase your parents or your past. If you want to keep using Carter, that's fine. The legal name is just, I want to be Lila Holt, Lila interrupted. And I want Daisy to be Daisy Holt. Because you're right. It doesn't erase Mama and Papa. They'll always be part of who I am. But you're my family now. You're my parents now, and I want the name that shows that. Clara made a small sound and pressed her hand to her mouth. Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright as he cleared his throat roughly. Then Lila Holt it is, he said, and we're honored. More than you know. That night, Lila made one final entry in her mother's journal before closing it and placing it carefully in the trunk at the foot of her bed, where it would stay safe but accessible whenever she needed the connection to her past. Dear Mama, my name is Lila Mae Holt now. I hope you understand. I hope you know it doesn't mean I love you any less or that I've forgotten you. But Ethan and Clara are my parents now, and I'm proud to carry their name. Daisy's doing wonderful. She's in school and making friends, and she barely has nightmares anymore. She still talks about you sometimes, tells people her first mama was the best at making bread and singing lullabies. But she's happy, Mama. We both are. I'm learning so much about remedies and healing. Clara says I have your gift for it, that gentle touch that makes people trust you. I'm going to keep learning, keep growing, and someday maybe I'll be as good as you were. We're safe now. Really, truly safe. Uncle Victor can't hurt us. The county can't take us away. We have a home and a family and a future. Everything you wanted for us, we have it. Thank you for being strong enough to warn us about Victor. Thank you for teaching me to be brave and to fight for what matters. Thank you for loving us enough to let go when you had to, trusting that somehow we'd find our way. We did, Mama. We found our way home. I'll always love you, but I'm going to be okay now. We both are. Your daughter, Lila Mae Holt. She closed the journal and stood, moving to the window. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, soft flakes drifting down in the lamplight. In the pasture, she could see the dark shapes of cattle huddled together for warmth. From downstairs came the murmur of voices, Ethan and Clara talking by the fire, planning for tomorrow, for next week, for the future they were building together. Daisy stirred in bed, calling out sleepily, Lila? I'm here. Lila moved to the bed and slipped under the covers beside her sister. Just watching the snow. Is it pretty? Very pretty. Daisy was quiet for a moment, then, are we really Holtz now? Forever? Forever, Lila confirmed. We're really theirs, and they're really ours. Nothing's going to change that. Good. Daisy's hand found Lila's in the darkness and squeezed. I love our family. Me too, Daiz. Me too. As Lila drifted toward sleep, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, about a knock on a stranger's door that had changed everything, about two adults who'd chosen love over convenience, who'd fought for children who weren't theirs by blood, but had become theirs by choice, about a judge who'd listened to a dying woman's wishes and a little girl's brave testimony, about a family forged not in the easy times, but in the hard ones, not through obligation, but through deliberate, conscious choosing. They'd lost so much, but they'd found more than they'd lost. They'd found home. And in the end, Ethan had been right. He hadn't arrived too late this time. He'd been exactly where he needed to be, exactly when he needed to be there. And so had Clara. And so had two desperate girls walking down a dusty road toward a column of smoke and an uncertain future. They'd all been exactly where they needed to be, and now they were exactly where they belonged, together. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the ranch in white, making everything clean and new. Inside, the fire burned warm, and a family slept peacefully under one roof. 4 people who'd found each other through grief and chance and determination. 4 people who'd chosen to be a family when the world had tried to tear them apart. 4 people who would face whatever came next together, bound not by blood but by something stronger, by love that was chosen, earned, and freely given. The carved figures on the mantel stood silent watch over them all, frozen in wood but alive in memory. The Holt family. Not perfect, not traditional, but theirs. And that was more than enough. It was everything.